Well, hey, Saints. Well, I'm on vacation here, but I just had a chance to do a little Bible study. I was in the book of Hosea, which has been in the back of my brain here for a while. And just to remind people, Hosea was a prophet before the northern tribe of Israel, or the northern tribes of Israel were captured, before 722 BC. And this was what he was warning about. And in the first few chapters, God used the prophet himself as an object lesson of what was going to happen to the northern tribes. And the northern tribes were either referred to as Israel or Ephraim, which was the largest tribe of the northern tribes. And then the southern kingdom was referred to as Judah, and they say Judah and Jerusalem. And so Hosea was a prophet to the northern tribes, and God told him to marry a woman, Gomer, and yet it's prophesied that she was going to be a harlot to him, and that was the object example that the northern tribes, Israel / Ephraim, was going to be first the harlot, to the Lord God, and then Hosea's, giving a prophecy about the destruction of the northern tribes coming from the land of Assyria. And the interesting thing is when you get to the end of Hosea here, the last 3-4 chapters, God says that this isn't a permanent situation. And so in 11, he's talking about the love he has for Ephraim or Israel. And then especially like in 13 and 14, it talks about the final punishment and then restoration, because she's been a wayward wife in that sense. So what I thought is interesting is we talk about the 10 northern tribes as the lost tribes. Now there's passages in the Old Testament that seem to refer to that some of the faithful from the northern tribes moved south when the idols were set up north. And so the 10 tribes were never really lost, but they were dispersed with only a remnant being present in southern Israel in the day. And so this judgment then is speaking to what happened back there in 722 BC and all that, and the Assyrians came down and in a couple of waves took away the northern tribes. And the first big wave was 722 BC, and then that was Tiglath-Pileser, probably saying that, probably hacking that up. And then the last one was actually that very exciting judgment that happened against the Syrian king Sennacherib, that finally met his fate for his army when he tried to come all the way down to Jerusalem. And so much of the entire book of Hosea is warning about that time period. But there's parts in here that refer to the restoration and that it wasn't permanent and God will remember, and all that never has happened yet, right? And so there's a end time fulfillment that's going to happen to these last bunch of references. And so let's just kind of go through and take a look at some of this. Okay, and so in 11 here, this is really talking about God talking about the judgment again, but that how he still loves Ephraim, or the northern tribes here. And in verse 10, they shall walk after the Lord, he shall roar like a lion. When he shall roar, then the children shall tremble from the west. I just want to show you here in a couple other translations what's going on in this verse 10. In the New King James it says, "Then they shall walk after the Lord. He will roar like a lion. When he roars, then his sons shall come trembling from the west." And then, let's look at the ESV. "They shall go after the Lord. He will roar like a lion. When he roars, his children shall come trembling from the west." Now that's really interesting because the capture way back in the day of 700s BC, Assyria would have been to the east. And yet during this restoration, when they go after the Lord, they call after the Lord, they come from the west. And now, footnotes in my Bible and the commentary I was reading both pointed to that's a curious phrase, that they're coming from the west. And I know there's speculation, like in the Messianic community and in Judaism, that Ephraim is represented by the west, and they see that as parallel. That the Western nations, Europe and the U.S. in particular, is the Ephraim of end times. And so, is that what that's pointing to? I just think that's cool how that's sitting there. "And they shall come trembling like birds." Oh, I guess this is ESV. Let's go back to the King James. Okay. "They shall tremble as a bird out of Egypt, and as a dove out of the land of Assyria. And it will place them in their houses, saith the Lord." Now there's the final restoration. And I thought that he's calling them again out of Assyria was interesting, because I've done a couple of videos now where we look at Amos 5 and Micah 4, actually, where it looks like the Jews in the end times, some of them are captured when the Antichrist comes into Jerusalem. He's going to take them back beyond Damascus into Babylon as captives. And so, again, when does the Lord roar like a lion? In Revelation 5 is when he's specifically named the Lion of the tribe of Judah. And you get all the Jewish titles for Jesus at that point. And then, of course, when the tribulation starts, it's the time of Jacob's trouble, and that's when they start recognizing that Jesus was the Messiah, and now he's got all these messianic Jewish titles at that point. And so here, they call on the Lord, and he roars like a lion is probably an end time reference right in here. And he calls them out of the land of Assyria, which, like I say, in prior videos we looked at how the Jewish people will be taken captive again back to Babylon, which is in the land of Assyria. "And Ephraim compasseth me about with lies, and the house of Israel with deceit. But Judah yet ruleth with God, and is faithful with the saints." And I'm not sure what to make with that, but we do know that probably at the time of that capture, there's also that wave of Jews that go off to the mountains of Basra or to Petra. I don't know if that's what that's pointing to there, but that's just, curious that there's some that are faithful and, rule with God or follow along with God. And then there's some that, have to get called out of the land of Assyria. So I'm not sure how to parse that, but this whole thing about Assyria again in the end times also reminds me of Isaiah 10:5 and Micah 5:5, where the Antichrist is most likely pointed to being called the Assyrian. And that's a bigger study, but you could make a case that there's a biblical narrative there that the Antichrist is in some way, shape, or form Nimrod of old, the original Assyrian, coming back full circle. And if you study, the cycles of the Bible, this idea of things of the past coming full circle again to the future is a repeated theme. And it sure appears that the Antichrist of the end times has something to do with Nimrod of old, the original Assyrian. And so the fact that this is Hosea depicting the Assyrians again coming in the end times, just the way they came during the time of Hosea, makes a lot of sense that these passages would flow in here. Let's look at Hosea 13, starting in verse 10. And it says, I will be thy king. Well, there you go. I mean, this is the declaration of, the Messianic kingdom is going to be set up. Where is any other that may save thee in all thy cities, and thy judges of whom thou sayest, give me a king and princes? I gave thee a king in my anger, and took him away in my wrath. The iniquity of Ephraim is bound up in sin, is hid. The sorrows of travailing woman shall come upon him. He is an unwise son, for he should not stay long in the place of breaking forth of children. And so, it looks here like that. This whole idea of the labor pains again is an end time reference. It's a bringing forth of the Messiah, and since they missed the Messiah on the first go around, here we're talking about the end times, return of Christ. And he stayed too long in the place of breaking forth of children, meaning Ephraim is going to be caught, in the birth canal or experience these labor pains. He's not going to be held from it. He's going to have to go through. He stays too long in the place of birth pangs. And I'll ransom them from the power of the grave, and I'll redeem them from death. O death, I will be thy plague, O grave. I will be their destruction. Repentance shall be hid from my eyes. And there's the judgment. Okay. Though he be fruitful among his brethren, an east wind shall come. The wind of the Lord shall come up from the wilderness, and his spring shall become dry, and his fountain shall be dried up, and he shall spoil the treasures of all the pleasant vessels. Samaria shall become desolate, for she hath rebelled against her God. And they shall fall by the sword, and their infants shall be dashed to pieces, and their women with child shall be ripped up. And again, that did happen back in the day of Hosea when the Assyrians came in. But there's some pointers here to the end time. And this is probably what happens when the Antichrist comes back into the land. Now, Samaria is interesting, right? Because it's part of the judgment that we see. I've done some videos here on the destruction of Damascus, and it shows up in Jeremiah 49, and Isaiah 17 is the more popular one. But the other cities that are referenced talk about when Damascus is destroyed, you have destruction in the north, Arpad and Hamath, which is north of Damascus, going up to the border of Turkey where all the fighting's going on right now. It's up by Aleppo and then coming south down to Damascus. But then you also have the cities of Aror, which brings that battle all the way down. Now those cities are just east of Jerusalem, over across the Jordan River in the side of Jordan. But in the same passages, it talks about in Isaiah 17 that the gleanings will be all that's left of that land area of the northern tribes during that destruction of Damascus. And so that very well could be this repeat of the desolation that happened during the time that the Assyrians came in. Same areas of the land, it's the northern part of Israel, the same cities would be affected. And so I just think, this could be a near far fulfillment or a shadow, in Hosea of the end time event. Just a lot of things are lining up. The Assyrian coming into the land, the recapturing of some of the people, the cities in the same areas being destroyed. So I think that's just pretty compelling here, because otherwise the 10 tribes are gone. But I've done some other videos here where we look at all the references, and there's tons of references to the children of Israel being returned back, the final Aliyah, if you want to say. Now that's been going on really as a trickle from the late 1800s, and then as a serious return starting in 1948. But what about all the quote lost northern tribes? They've been dispersed in the nations, and many of them, I'm sure, don't even know that their lineage goes back, to Israel. Yet God knows where they all are, and we see in a bunch of those passages. And I'm thinking about Isaiah 11 down to verse 11, and I'm thinking about Ezekiel 20, starting in verse 33, where there's a final return, a final consummating return at the return of Christ that restores all the tribes and all the people of Israel back to their land. And so, I think there's this end time restoration that we're also seeing here in Hosea of, Ephraim, or the northern 10 tribes. Now let's just finish it off looking at Hosea here. 14. O Israel, return unto the Lord thy God, for thou hast fallen by thine iniquity. Take with you words, and turn to the Lord, and say unto him, Take away all of our iniquity, receive us graciously, so we will render the calves of our lips. Asher shall not save us. Now again, is that because they trusted in the Assyrian in the end times, the Antichrist? We will not ride upon horses, neither will we say any more to the work of our hands, You are our gods, for in thee the fatherless find mercy. I will heal their backsliding, I will love them freely, for mine anger is turned away from them. I will be as dew unto Israel. Now, dew symbolically is resurrection, so I will be as resurrection unto Israel. He shall grow up as the lily, and cast forth his roots as Lebanon. His branches shall spread, and his beauty shall be as the olive tree, and his smell as Lebanon. They that dwell under his shadow shall return. There it is, the return. They shall revive as the corn, and grow as the vine, and the scent thereof shall be as the wine of Lebanon. Ephraim shall say, What have I to do any more with idols? I have heard him and observed him, and I am like a green fir tree. From me is thy fruit found. Who is wise that he shall understand these things? Prudent, and he shall know them. For the ways of the Lord are right, and the just shall walk in them, but the transgressors shall fall therein. Well, I think that's what we're seeing is, my high-level interpretation of these passages is God didn't forget the dispersed northern tribes, that they're going to go through the tribulation period, which was that reference about being caught in the birth pangs for too long. They'll be thinned out, if you want to say, they're going to experience that judgment, but God's not going to forget them, and he is going to restore them to the land. And those that understand and accept the Lord, in this case Jesus. And what's interesting is Hosea is another name for salvation, just the way Yeshua is, or Joshua, in the text. And so Hosea's name means salvation, and it ends with the final salvation here, the revival of those northern tribes returning And that's the final promise of God, that they'll be back in the land and they'll be restored. And the fact that dew is referenced here, I'll be as dew unto Israel, is a resurrection. So that, that could even be pointing to the final resurrection of the Old Testament saints and those that died trusting in the coming Messiah. There will be a resurrection before the millennial reign, but at a minimum, those tribes, God has not forgotten them, and there will be a restoration to the land at a minimum, which is promised. So, just thought you'd find that interesting, saints. Hosea, again, a prophet to the northern tribes right before they were captured by Assyria, but definitely with these last chapters, God promising them that they're going to experience the tribulation and that God will restore them because he loves them afterwards, and he's going to plant them back in the land, and those that love the Lord are going to walk justly, and they'll be restored. Well, God bless you, saints. Um, hope to see everybody soon.